Hello, today I'm going to be talking about The Science of Storytelling by Storr. This came out in 2019 and it is about how to write a story that is going to be most compelling for the human mind. It's mostly about novels, but also is relevant for like TV and for film. So it goes through, it has all these different sections. It goes through like world building, character development, like the dramatic questions, so how to kind of like structure your piece of storytelling. And he does all that through the lens of psychology. So every point he makes is backed up by science. And yeah, I've never read a book on writing before, so I don't have a lot to compare it to. But I thought it was really useful. I'm not a writer, but as probably most people that make videos about books on YouTube, I have my idea for a novel that's been festering in me for years. And I thought it'd just be interesting to read this book. I'm not planning on writing it imminently, but just interesting to read this book and have those kind of like thoughts percolate a bit more. I actually highlighted a load of bits in this book, which I haven't done in a while, but I find really handy for non-fiction books to just be able to flick through and immediately see like the things that you grabbed from it. So yeah, it taught me some very specific things about what to do and what not to do in terms of storytelling, but also gave me some like thoughts about like the grander concept of storytelling, which I'm gonna tell you now through the form of a story. No, I'm not gonna do that. One thing I do want to tell you about the book though is that he uses a lot of examples to illustrate his points. So if you're really well read, that's going to be fantastic for you. But I found like there were quite a lot of examples that I could get and I had read, or are just like so in the popular consciousness that it's kind of like easy to understand why he's mentioning it. But there were some books, like he kept using Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro as an example. As soon as he kind of like explained the start of the plot of it, I was like, oh, I want to read this book. I want to read this book. So now I'm reading it this month for my book club book. I managed to like strong arm my friends into picking that as a book club book. But then anytime it came up again in the rest of this, I would just like skip over that entire paragraph. So you have to be wary of being spoiled. Everything is spoiled. But I think if you go into it and whenever you see a name of something that you don't want to know any more about and can just like gloss over it, but if that ends up being half of the examples, you're really not going to be left with a lot. So the first thing I got from this is actually in the very end bit of the book, where he's talking about the sacred flaw, is having your protagonist just reflect yourself. I think it's like a foible that a lot of first-time writers run into, because he talks about how like we are the protagonists of our own lives. Like no matter what the scenario, we think that our reaction is the right and most appropriate reaction. So it's very easy to kind of plan your character and then actually when you're writing them, make them do the things that you would do, and that doesn't actually reflect their actual character. And in the context of the book that I want to write, it's really hard to basically like add flaws, because anything that isn't me is a flaw, because I'm perfect. But to my mind, if I thought I was doing the wrong thing, I would do a different thing. So making your characters act differently to how you would naturally react and still like respecting them and like understanding why they're doing certain things is like quite a challenge, and definitely not one that I think I am capable of. The other bit of like very practical advice is this is literally like story writing 101. He was talking about like using the passive or active voice and kind of the order of words. So here his example is Jane gave a kitten to her dad versus Jane gave her dad a kitten. But if you do it in the order of Jane, kitten, dad, like that that is kind of like the order that you'd see it in your brain if you were playing it as a film. So it's a lot easier to understand when it's more filmic. And since I read this book, every bit of writing I do, I mean I do a fair bit of like technical documentation for work and that kind of thing, I then kind of like look at the sentence structure and like flip it around and see if it makes more sense, and usually it does, because my natural style of writing is quite incomprehensible to the average person, because it's the way that I think, which is sometimes a bit backwards. So that's all the practical advice I'm going to give you. Now I want to talk about like the abstract, because this book is all about stuff that like the human brain finds the most appealing when it comes to storytelling. It's like, do you even have to study it, or can you just like naturally understand what's good and write something that is naturally good for people because you are a person? Like that psychology is already inside of us. And I think it's a comparison I was thinking with like acting. Maybe that's not quite right, but there are some actors that just like never had to train. They're just great off the bat. They just like understand how to inhabit another person just internally somehow. And then there are other people that train and train and train and get really good by working at it. And I wonder if there's like a similar thing with storytelling, you know, playwriting and novel writing, etc., where you can have just like a natural gift for an understanding of what makes something compelling, or you could not, but you could learn it from this. But I don't know, I think everyone kind of understands what makes a good story like internally. You know, with my novel idea, a lot of the points in this were actually kind of already very aligned with what I was imagining my story would be, in terms of like how I set the stage when it starts and the kind of arc of the book. So in that way, I'm not sure it like actually gives you much brand new knowledge, but it frames it in a very kind of concrete, scientific way. And following on from that, if there's like a perfect structure of a novel, and that's just the brain prefers to any other structure, does that not mean that we will all conform to that structure eventually, and then there just ends up being this kind of like homogeneity in media, which could even be self-fulfilling, that we only enjoy that narrative structure because it's all we're given? Back in like 2015, I want to say, I went to see this musical called Beyond the Fence, and it was the first AI generated musical. That sounds a bit grandiose. It was like every element of it was something that they used data to decide, from like the genders of the characters to what age in history it should be, to the like 3-act structure and the kind of relationships between characters. That was all kind of decided by machine, and a lot of the lines and lyrics were generated by machine, and so was a lot of the kind of like musical tones. And it was very impressive as a performance. I actually wrote about it in my dissertation, which was about like human-computer interaction. But the thing is, I left it thinking, oh, if this is just like the form, then is that it? Like, is there no creativity? When you're working off a set of, these are the most popular Broadway musicals in the last 60 years, and then these are the unpopular ones, fine, what makes a thing good? Then we just end up with all of the exact same thing. And thinking about it more, that's a very kind of basic and like almost cynical view of creativity. So I've come to a different analogy, and I think it's more like musical notes. There are certain scales in music that sound more harmonious to human ears, and it's not that you can't make beautiful things that go against that rule, but if you want to start from a good baseline, picking something that already we know appeals to human ears makes sense. I'm not sure I've made any sense there. I'm just kind of like talked myself into a hole. But yeah, it's interesting to think about like the best books you've read and what are their commonalities, and obviously there's some personal preference in there, but in terms of structure, in terms of like, especially in here, it's talking about like the arc of a protagonist, like whether they start high and go low, or whether they go low, high, low. I found the bit, so I'm just going to read this from the book. Some people did some research. They found stories tended towards 6 emotional arcs: rags to riches, riches to rags, man in a hole, which is a fall then a rise, Icarus, a rise and a fall, Oedipus, fall, rise, fall. That's all 6. And the most commercially successful emotional arcs were the Icarus, the rise and fall, the Oedipus, fall, rise, fall, and 2 sequential man in hole, so fall, rise, which is just, it's so interesting to be like, the most commercially successful way of writing a book or a film or a TV show is having a character fail and then get back up, and then fail and get back up. And it seems kind of like boring, but also it's what our brain's like. Anyway, I've really definitely talked myself into a hole. 2 women in a hole, more like, right? That's what this video has been. This has been a review of The Science of Storytelling by Will Storr. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. Just at the end here, the design of this item I adore. I think this cover's really gorgeous. The spine is this wiggly gold line. And I just want to take a minute to talk about the typesetting. This is typeset in freight text, which is just a gorgeous sans serif family, and it just every time I picked the book up, I just like thought about how gorgeous it was. It would just kind of pop into my head of like, wow, these letter forms are beautiful. Didn't really do anything to hurt or improve the content of the book, but just shout out to beautiful typography and good printing and publishing. I love it. That's enough for now. I will be back soon with another book review. Bye.